Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 277 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is the best version of you. Our quote of the day comes to us from Steph Curry. What I tell people is to be the best version of yourself in anything that you do. You don't have to live anybody else's story. It is an honor to bring you today's episode. I've known our guest for quite a few years, and I've truly enjoyed so many of his books. David Cottrell is all about positively impacting and inspiring other people to become the best version of themselves. I hope you enjoy today's episode. David, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Good morning, Chris. Thank you so much for having me on.
I appreciate it. So the first question we ask everybody is, are you ready to bring it today?
Absolutely. I am thrilled to be here with you, and I'm just looking forward to sharing a few minutes with you to where we can offer some advice to some people that might help them along the way.
I appreciate it. So as the theme of our podcast as well as our company is No Quit Living, I wanted to ask you if you have either a personal story of perseverance or perhaps a really challenging time when you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
Well, for sure I do. I mean, I think that everybody probably has, their own stories. My story, just to give you a little bit about my background, is my career began with Xerox back in 1975, believe it or not, right out of college. I wanted to go to work for Xerox or IBM because they had the best training at that time, and Xerox offered me and IBM didn't, and that's the reason I went with Xerox, but I was extremely fortunate to do that. And then after 10 years with them and moving my way up the ladder with them, I went to a new opportunity at Federal Express is what it was called then. Now it's called FedEx. And I stayed there for 10 years. So I worked for two extremely good companies, both Malcolm Baldrige winning companies and both very much in the personal development and professional development. So that was my background going into launching off into a little bit more risky area. And I went to a Chapter 11 company, a company coming out of Chapter 11 to turn them around and to stabilize them. And so I did that for 3 years as well. And even in that move, going from the large successful companies to this company that wasn't making it very well, the first day I was there, man, I thought I made the biggest mistake I've ever made. I mean, literally, I went home, told my wife, man, I've just really made a mistake. I had the greatest job in the world, and now I've got this mess that I've got to deal with. And it's not exactly the way it was pictured to me. And you know how that is. There's always some surprises when you get into a new opportunity, but this was pretty serious. And so about 3 weeks later, we were within days of going through bankruptcy again, which would have been the very end. And I wanted to quit. I wanted out of there. I wanted to go back to where I was or go somewhere else that was a little bit more stable. But I had signed a 3-year contract. And so I made a commitment to myself at that point in time that I'm going to make it these 3 years. I don't know why I'm here, but maybe there's going to be something revealed to me later on down the road that at least touches on, why I'm having to go through this. So I did make that commitment to myself to stay there 3 years. It was 3 painful years, but 3 very rewarding years as well. We did pull out of Chapter 11. We did not go into it the second time. We made significant progress, but 3 years and 1 day after I came on board with them, I did resign. And so then I started up my own company, and I thought that I was ready for that. And then all of a sudden, that your business plan looks good, everything looks great, and then all of a sudden the marketplace is a little bit different than what the plan was on paper, and it wasn't working. It did not work. I had two partners. One partner, if you use a golf analogy, he played about 2 holes, and then he threw his clubs down and wanted his green fee back. Another partner was able to make it a little bit longer, and he made it about eight or 9 holes through the round, and then he had to go somewhere to continue on. And then that left me. It left me by myself, new company, startup, all of the issues that you have going with you with a startup company. So my question then was, again, same question: do I go back to the traditional arena that I had played in and I was comfortable in, or do I stick it out? I received a telephone call from a person who I had dealt with while I was at FedEx. And he says, do you want to come and speak to my organization and our customers in Washington, D.C. on this particular date? Well, I was sitting there contemplating whether I needed to quit and go back or continue to go. And he provided me this opportunity. I went up there, I spoke to him, and without getting into a lot more of this story, that particular speech and that particular moment with this particular person was the catalyst for me to be able to continue on. And I was able to make it on to get some traction. And then I started writing books, and then things started happening down the road. And then looking back, I could see that the experience in the Chapter 11 company led me to all of what I do today. I learned marketing. I learned direct mail. I learned how to deal with people. I learned all of these things from that crisis that I went through for 3 years. So yes, I've had many no-quit stories even since then, plenty of personal stories as well as professional stories. But that's my number one no-quit story, is I was able to hang in there long enough to where I was able to develop the traction to continue my business, and here I am 25 or 6 years later, still doing it.
I think we all encounter those obstacles and those challenges along the way, but I think it was very important how you briefly touched on the fact that during your own company, it was all of those prior experiences that allowed you to get to that level and to continue be successful 25, 26 years later. So wanted to touch on what you said and I'm a avid reader myself, and I've read quite a few of your books. Just wanted to ask you a pretty black and white question, but I know so many people have thought about, want to write their own book. What was the difference of you thinking about it versus going ahead and writing that first book?
Well, that's an interesting question. And just to, before I answer that question, I want to tell you that I think that everybody has a book in them. Everybody is working their way through their book right now. And for you to sit down, for anyone to sit down and document where you are, where you're trying to head, how you got to where you are, I think that's an incredibly important experience for all. But what generated mine is, as I said, I was struggling, and a buddy of mine was in an organization, and he said, "Man, we had this guy named Rick Butts, Butts, who I have never met even to this day, but they had this guy named Rick Butts come and speak to their organization." He says, "You need to call him and find out, how he got from where you are to where he is." So I call him up and I say, "I'm a guy in Dallas, Texas. You've never met me, but a buddy of mine told me about you, and I'm struggling." And he says, "Man, I've been exactly where you are." He says, "You got to have a book." And I said, "Well, great. That's easy for you to say, but," I said, "What was your book?" He says, "I wrote a book called The Safari Adventure." And it was about these people on the safari adventure and the, problem solving to make it through it. And that was part of his industry, our business was a problem solving consultant. And I thought, man, that makes sense for him because, it helps his business and all that. But I don't know. I don't have a safari adventure. And so I was mowing the yard that particular day, and I was feeling pretty sorry about myself, and not having a safari adventure and not knowing what my role really was going to be. And then it came to me that there are some things that I know something about. And I knew a lot about golf because that was my passion. And I knew a lot about leadership because that's what I had been studying and preparing for. And so I thought, well, if I put those two together, that could be sort of my safari adventure. So I came up with those um, two elements together in a book called Birdies, Pars, and Bogeys, Leadership Lessons from the Links. This was in 1994 or 6 or something like that. And that particular book was developed because I had to, because it was I needed something to give me credibility within organizations that I was trying to go to. And as Rick told me, he says it doesn't matter what your subject matter is. What matters is that you come up with something that people can connect with you. And so that was my first connection on Birdies, Pars, and Bogeys, Leadership Lessons from the Links. But the reason I did it at that time was out of necessity. But what I tell everybody today is everybody needs to be writing the book, not out of necessity, but out of their legacy of leaving it with their children or with the people that are important to them.
So, follow-up question to that I ask every guest is, I'm curious if there's anything that you've read recently or you're currently reading that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
I read books all the time because I do publish books. My company is a small publisher. There's a couple that I would recommend right off the bat. One of them is called The Hero Effect by a buddy of mine named Kevin Brown. And he goes into being a hero wherever you are. And he's one of the best public speakers in the world, literally one of the top 5. And this little book describes a lot of the stories that he has in his speaking, but it also is applicable to everybody. I mean, wherever we are, we can be a hero. And then another one from a brand new author. It's his first book. It's called Move Over, Move Up, or Move On. And it's a leadership type storybook, which I like those fables. And he talks about this guy who is similar to my Monday morning leadership. He's struggling and he's working through issues, and he goes and has a mentor to help him through those issues. So those are just a couple. I mean, there's so many good books. Patrick Lencioni has, a lot of good books. John Townsend, I love him. There's just a lot of good books. You just need to find a person or a subject matter that you're really interested in and become an expert in that, along with the people that you're reading. There's another one called The Contagious You. I don't know if you've seen that one yet. It's relatively new.
No, I have not.
But I think everybody should find what they're interested in and be the very best at that. And just try to be the very best version of themselves.
I love that. So you touched on something that is near and dear towards me, and we often discuss it on the show, is the word and the concept of mentor or mentorship. And in quite a few of your books, you talk about mentorship directly and indirectly. And I know it's been important in your books, and it's something that I believe is important in all different areas of life. And maybe a pretty simple question, but wanted to get your perspective for any of our listeners who are looking to find a mentor or possibly do some mentoring themselves. What's the best first step you would suggest?
Well, first of all, I think that everybody has to understand they need a mentor. Everybody needs a coach. In fact, Don Shula, I think, wrote the book many years ago, Everyone Needs a Coach. Well, that's true. There's times to where you're not able to get through the challenges that are before you without someone assisting, without someone that's been there before and providing you at least encouragement and hopefully direction. The example I use on that, Chris, is I live here in New Orleans part-time, and we have the longest bridge maybe anywhere. It's 24-mile bridge connecting the North Shore with the South Shore. And some days the fog is so thick that they have to close the bridge. I mean, no cars can go across the bridge because you can't see far enough to go anywhere. And then some days they will open that bridge back up, but they'll have a caravan of police cars that direct you across the bridge on a very slow pace so that everybody can safely make it across. And then on most days, it's clear and everybody can go at their 70-mile-an-hour speed. Well, that's sort of the way that we are as individuals. Some days, I mean, we can't see far enough to where we can even get on the bridge. And that's when a mentor can help us to at least know, hey, we need to stick here for a while until it clears up. And then we can move on across. And then sometimes we need a mentor to help us, move a little bit slower than maybe we want to. And then sometimes we need a mentor to help us to say, hey, it's full speed ahead. We got to make hay while the sun is shining, go forward. So it's up to the situation, but everyone needs a mentor. And another thing, in addition to that, is that people sort of on the tail end of their careers, especially, want to be important to other people. They want to be mentors, but they cannot do that unless they're asked. And so we have people that need the action of being a mentor. We have people that need mentors to help them, but connecting them is the challenge. And you have to find someone that's been where you're trying to go, that you respect, that has the same value system, that is willing to invest the time and the energy to help you get to where you're trying to go.
I appreciate you touch on that, and I think it is important, and it's something similar we often discuss in some ways as an accountability partner. And I think the common theme between the two, and depending on how you define it, is somebody that can help you and somebody that can help guide you. And I think it is important to have coaches and or mentors. And I know a lot of people have had different coaches and mentors at different points in their lives. And I think to your comment, as you get older in life, typically successful people want to pay it forward back to individuals because they typically had people at different points in their life who would help them as well.
That's right.
So I have to steal a wonderful question from your book, Destination Success, which you were kind enough to send me a copy of, and I read, and I definitely recommend it to our listeners. But I was curious, for you, David, is there one guiding principle that has really influenced your success the most?
Well, I think the guiding principle that has meant the most to me is I learned very early on that whoever I surrounded myself with, that's who I was going to become, and that was also what would dictate my success in the future. So my number one guiding principle was find the right people that can help me to get to where I'm trying to go and not prevent me from getting there. In that particular book, Destination Success, I go through 10 principles similar to that, of which everybody really goes through the same ones, whether you're having to blast through a tough time to where you have to figure out how to make it through it, or hug and change, or quit drifting. All of those things are areas that people will have to get through. And the way that particular book was designed was taking those 10 defining moments of those 10 mentors to create this book that flowed as a fable all the way through. So, all of them were important to me, but getting the right people on my team and making sure that we were all connected with our own integrity and our own value systems, that was the main thing for me.
So I want to just touch on one thing you just briefly mentioned, is hugging change. I wanted to see if you wouldn't mind just really quickly identifying that and kind of touching that, because I thought it was a very powerful perspective, not only for your book, but I also think for life in general.
Yeah, a lot of us, I think it's natural to resist change to a certain degree. I think that we all are sort of trapped in our own perspective of how we were brought up, or the companies that we worked in or the person that we worked for or whatever. But I think that we're sort of all trapped in that. I call it data points in that particular book, in that, we only have a few data points. If you look at the world and in business, the totality of business, there are so many data points that we're not familiar with, that once they're introduced to us, the first thing we do is we say, "Oh my gosh, I mean, this is way outside of my boundaries of anything I've ever thought about." So the 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 first thing in that hugging change is that you sort of have to let go so you can grow. You have to let go of your of what you think is the only way, to find out what some alternative ways might be. Because what happens in our only way mentality is we become complacent. And then the complacency, is the root of you not being able to get anywhere. So introducing more data points, understanding that all improvement does require some change somewhere along the way. And improvement's not going to change by us, not going to happen by us continuing to do, what we're the most comfortable doing, without introducing more information to help us make different decisions.
I think that's so important. And a follow-up question to that, one of our favorite words we often dissect with our guests is the word accountability. And I just wanted to get your perspective of what the word accountability means to you.
Well, accountability to me is, number one, is to myself. It means that that I am okay with what I see in that mirror. Whatever my actions are in line with what my values are. And to make sure that happens, I have to thoroughly understand what my values are, and then the tougher decisions are made. Then accountability to other people are doing exactly what I tell them I'm going to do. There's a book that we published a few years ago. You might be familiar with it. It was written by a guy named Henry Evans, called "Winning with Accountability," and that's a really good book on how to become more accountable, and how to understand how to hold yourself and other people accountable for the actions that you have. But I think that accountability is one of the main things that we all have to have, in addition to continual improvement and the other things that we try to do to become better.
I love that, and it's a fascinating book. I appreciate you touching on that. So, an interesting question to ask you is, if you had to define yourself, David, but you could only use one word, what word would you pick?
Well, I think that word probably would have evolved over the years. I think at this point in time, where I'm at in my career, I think that the one word would be encourager. That's what I try to do. I try to encourage people through my writing, where I can reach a a much broader audience, and I try to encourage people with my relationships too. But that's a more narrow audience. But I think that those around me would probably agree that would that would be the one word that would best describe me at this point.
I think a perfect follow-up question to that is, throughout your books, there's a positive theme throughout your stories and your fables of the importance of positivity. And I just wanted to ask you, has that been something that's always been around in your life? Was it passed on to you from your parents, or was it something that you experienced throughout your professional career? But I think it's so important, and I love how you touch on that throughout your books.
I think I've always had the positive. I've always been down that path more than anything else. But really, I remember when I was with Xerox back in the day, I was a sales planning manager, and I would go to colleges to recruit for Xerox. And I remember, noticing all of these kids coming in and what they were bringing to the table. And the thing that you wanted to be around is someone that felt good about themselves and could help other people feel good about themselves as well. And so it became more aware to me at that time. And also at about that time, I became aware of Zig Ziglar's "See You at the Top" book, which was the first personal development book maybe in history. I'm not sure, but it's one of the first, and it had an impact on me. And that particular book I read, and I could see where I could make some changes to become better and be more positive. And I think that's really where I began my personal development and my positive role in everything that I tried to do. Although, we all are challenged with that. When tough times come up, it's not easy to be positive, but it is a choice that we can make.
I love that you just touch on that. Is it's not something that it's easy to do, and it's not something that's automatic, but it's something that we do 100% have a choice on. So wanted to ask you, what's the best way for our listeners to follow you, find out more about you, and for those that are interested in getting possibly some of your books, what's the best way for them to do so?
Well, thank you for that. And, the books can go through any normal channel. But my company site is cornerstoneleadership.com. And on there, we have books from many different authors in addition to me. And you'll be able to see a lot of personal development, a lot of different areas that you might want to exchange some thoughts with those authors. So that's the best way is cornerstoneleadership.com or davidcottrell.com. Either one of those will get you to where you need to be.
And then last question for you, David. I wanted to ask if you have some parting words you'd like to leave today with our listeners.
Well, Chris, I think that every one of us, we all have talents and we all have abilities that are natural to us and God-gifted talents that we can use. And my parting word would be just be the best version of you. When I first started my business, I wanted to be the best version of Brian Tracy back then, and that did not work for me. That's the reason it almost failed. The reality was, I was different and my talents were different. So just make the decision to be the best version of you. What is the thing that you really want to do? Who do you want to help? What does success mean to you? And start providing yourself a path to go on to do that. And that's what I hope that Destination Success will do for our listeners here, because what it does is provide you a path to move forward.
I think that's an absolute perfect way to end today's podcast. And I wanted to just thank you for not only your time, but also what you share with us. And I hope you and I can speak again soon.
Thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for listening to episode number 277. I thought it was very important how David touched upon finding those right people that can help you. Something I often discuss as who is on your bus, in your corner, or in your tribe. Perhaps you should ask yourself that. Who are those people that are on your bus, in your corner, or in your own tribe? In David's parting words, he spoke about being the best version of yourself, and that is very key. It's okay to emulate or look up to other people or companies, but at the end of the day, make sure that you focus on becoming the best version of you for you. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.